Last Saturday, I got to preach to the youth, and it was in a room with 400 youth, so I had to yell, keep their attention. I'm still recovering my voice from that, so you have to bear with me. This is not how my voice normally sounds, but if I lose it halfway through, I'm going to need, you're going to have to come up and take over for me, Joe, okay? So be ready, okay? I was reading a story this week about Stalin, who was this dictator, pretty horrible guy who killed a lot of people, but he instilled fear in everyone, was how he kept control of all the people who were close to him. There's a story that's told that one time a group of people stood up and were applauding for him, and everyone was so terrified to stop applauding that they kept going for over an hour. Eventually, one guy decided, okay, it's enough, and he sat down. Everyone followed him. He was executed the next day for being the first to stop applauding. So, I mean, that's the kind of fear this guy instilled, right? He tried to squash any sort of individuality, and he wanted to make sure that people were just afraid of him. Well, he was getting along older in his age, and he was at this cabinet meeting, and he exploded in some sort of rage, and he had a seizure, like something happened, and he actually died a few days later. But he got so mad, he stood up, and then he fell into this seizure, and he was became still. Well, this one cabinet man got up, he just started dancing. He's like, we're free, we're free, we're free, right? And then all of a sudden, Stalin's opened his eyes, and immediately the guy jumped down, grabbed his hand. He's like, sir, are you okay? Today we're going to talk a little bit about this concept, the idea of showing something to the outside world when maybe there's something else going on inside. We're starting a series we're going to be going through for the next couple of weeks leading up to Easter called Seen. Seen. And the series is about how God sees the real you. What's really happening in your life. God sees what others don't see. God sees the motives that drive you. God sees what happens behind closed doors. Right? God sees the things that you don't think anyone else notices. In the beginning of the Bible, there's this story about this woman named Hagar, and she was forced to go into the desert with her son. She thought she was going to die. She had no food, no water. She literally puts her son under this little bit of shade, and she goes away, and she's like, we're going to die. And then God shows up, and he's like, you're not going to die. I have a plan and a purpose for you. I'm going to rescue you. And he sends her away. He gives her water and supplies, and she's able to actually go on from that. But here's what she says. This is what's interesting. As she's walking away after God has rescued her, it says, she gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees me. First she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. And what's so interesting to me when I read that is she didn't say, you're the God who rescues me. You're the God who provides for me. What stuck out the most out of that whole interaction of her? That he saw her. Right? And it's not that those other things about our God are not powerful, right? Our God is a powerful God. Our God can heal. Our God can provide. But so many times we're stuck in a place where we can't go forward in our lives. We're stuck in a place where we think no one notices or no one notices what's going on. But for our God, the God who created the world and created you, he's known as the God who sees you, who knows what's going on in your life, the good, the bad, the ugly stuff, the disappointments. That's the God that we gather together to worship. Notice, our God has the power to do powerful things in your life. He's the one who can make a difference, but before all of that, he notices and sees you. And that's what we're going to talk about. So if you got a Bible with you or you have your phone and you want to look it up, we're going to look at Mark chapter 3. The book of Mark chapter 3. We're going to look at a section of the Bible where Jesus comes face to face with people who show one thing to the world but have something else going on underneath. That's what we're going to look at today. So it's kind of similar to the story of Stalin, right? Many times what we're showing to the guy that we're afraid of maybe is different than what's actually going on. So we're going to talk about that. So Mark chapter 3, story takes place right when Jesus is starting to get the religious people all riled up. It's like the beginning of his ministry. There was this group of religious people who were in charge of everything. They were the ones who told everyone how to follow God. This is what it means to follow God. And Jesus shows up on the scene, and he does the exact opposite of what they expect of a rabbi. We read that verse during the worship music, right? Where it's like, hey, you guys love being called rabbi. Why? It's like the same today as like pastor, right? It's like, you guys love being called pastor, right? You got those like people that just love the title. You're like, no, I'm Dr. Holcomb, no. You call me Professor Holcomb or whatever, right? Like you got people who are just like, that's their identity, that's their pride, right? That was what was happening with these religious people. They're like, no, you call me rabbi. And Jesus is like, you got no respect from me, okay? Because Jesus saw what was really going on. So Jesus comes on the scene. He starts taking care of people that are poor, something that the religious people weren't really doing, right? He comes on the scene. He starts healing people that are broken, that have had messed up stuff in their life. He starts caring for them, something the religious people hadn't been doing, right? He's making the Pharisees look bad. He's starting to undermine their power, the fear. Remember the same way Stalin is keeping people in fear? That's what the Pharisees were doing. These religious people, they were keeping people in check, in control, through fear. And unfortunately, the church has done the same thing for thousands of years. We're going to talk about that. But those are the kind of things that are on the minds of these religious people as Jesus walks into the temple. Here's a picture of the temple. It's over in Israel right now. This is the same temple that Jesus would have walked into. And he walks in there on the Sabbath day, which would have been Saturday. And you see the religious people had already had some arguments with Jesus. They had already gotten a little bit of a tussle. They were getting some fights with him. And they weren't exactly excited to see him show up here on their own turf, right? This is their area. This is where their central seat of power. And they're like, oh, Jesus showing up, right? So look at me, verse 1 of Mark 3. It says, another time, Jesus went into the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. Okay, so you got to understand something. The religious leaders at this time took following the rules to another level. They didn't want to just follow the rules. They wanted to very, very clearly elevate the rules so they could use them to control people. That's what they were doing. How could they do this? They would take rules that God had given, simple rules, and they would add guidelines to make sure they knew who was actually following them. Who was in, who was out, that kind of thing. Make it difficult for someone the average person, to actually follow all these rules, right? For instance, the Sabbath. This is what's talking about here. The guideline from God was Exodus 20. It says, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but on the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it, don't do any work, neither you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. This is what God says about the Sabbath. The seventh day, specifically for the Jewish people, is Friday at sundown till Saturday at sundown. That's the Sabbath. He says, don't do any work. That's all he says. It's pretty simple, right? It's like, don't do any work. Not you, not your kids, nor your employees, not even your animals, right? The dog is not allowed to do any work. You got to make him sit down. He's just sitting there, right? This is what it says. So the religious leaders start asking, okay, so what is work? What does it mean to actually work, right? Is lighting a candle work? What do you think? No? Well, no. I mean, you're wrong. It is work, according to the religious leaders, okay? You can't light a candle on Sabbath. Sorry, you're in trouble, okay? You're out of the temple, okay? How about walking 15 steps on the Sabbath. What do you think? Not work. How about 20 steps, JJ? No, that's work, so you're out of the temple, okay? You can take 15 steps, but not 20, okay? How about if you have to rip some toilet paper? You know, you're doing your business. And is that work? What do you think, Joe? No, it is work. You're out of the temple too. You can't rip toilet paper. That's work. Okay? So the Jewish people would come up with all these workarounds, okay? If you need to light a candle, you got to light it before Sabbath, and then you let it burn the whole time, okay? Right? And this is true in Israel today. I've been over to Israel a couple times. They have such a thing as a Sabbath elevator, okay? You can't push the button to go up on the elevator. So the elevator just stops at every floor. You got to go to the 19th floor. It's going to be a long trip, okay? So you get in the elevator and it just ding, 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 ding. That's not doing any work. You didn't push the button. So they get these workarounds. It's all about the rules. Same thing with the toilet paper. They pre-rip their toilet paper, set it on the side, okay? I'm not kidding. These things, this is true, right? So these rules, you create these rules, but you also create a way where you can kind of get around it. It's all about the show, you notice? It's all about what people see. They come up with these guidelines because they wanted rules they could enforce. So they could visibly see who was in and who was out. Now here's the thing, that's not how God works. God cares far more about the heart. What's the motivation behind what you're doing? How are you coming at things? That matters so much more to God than our little loopholes and workarounds. And see, the heart is what God cares about. And what do we care about as humans? We care about the rules. We like to know simple, okay, I want this like black and white. I want to know that I'm in. And it's funny, a whole another tangent is how we then pick the rules that are easy for us to follow. You go through the Bible, you're like, okay, I'm going to pick the ones that I follow and it, like as like ones that are easy, like no one else should get those wrong, and then I'm going to gloss over the ones that I struggle with. That's what the religious leaders were doing as well. So Jesus walks in the temple, sees this man here with a shriveled hand. Probably was born that way. His hand was all shriveled up. And the religious leaders, do they see the man with a shriveled hand? No. What do they see? Here. Next slide. What do they see? An opportunity. What do they see? An opportunity. Remember, this isn't their first encounter with Jesus. They'd already been fighting with him. Just a few verses ago, they were arguing with him about the Sabbath. His disciples were picking some grain on the Sabbath. They're like, what are you doing snacking on the Sabbath? You know, you can't pick the grain on the Sabbath. They were so mad at him. And so here's their opportunity to get him back. Okay? Here's what an opportunity is. Opportunity is when you're walking along a sidewalk with that cousin you don't really like. Okay, and you look down the sidewalk a little ways, and this is what you see on the sidewalk. Right? And you're just like, let me just keep his attention a little bit up here, you know, talking with him until he steps right into that, and you're like, oh, that's a bummer, bro. Right? That's an opportunity. It's where you see something that's about to happen. You know maybe you should do something, the right thing to do, right? It's when you keep your eyes open for something that you could use to get that person back. Something they themselves can't see or maybe wouldn't see, and you're like, oh, I can use this to get above them. That's what the religious leaders are doing here with Jesus. Here's their opportunity. They got this guy over here with a withered hand. He's in the temple, right? He's in the synagogue. It's completely possible that the religious leaders even went to his house that day and they said, hey, bro, it's a great day for you to come to the temple, right? We need you in the temple today. I don't know. This is like reading into it a bit, but maybe they're like, we need to make sure he's there, and they planted him there, maybe. So here's this man. He's had a hard life already. You know, you have a withered hand. Nowadays, not that big of a deal. We can even we got like all kinds of stuff to help, all kinds of things depending on your disability, right? We are a society that is more open and supportive of people with disabilities. In this day and age, that was not the case. You're actually seen as probably cursed by God. Maybe you sinned, maybe your parents sinned, and so he would have been socially outcast, People would have talked behind his back all the time. He would have questioned himself why God has cursed me. He would have been hurting. He would have been suffering. And so these painful circumstances are already on his life. He's been treated harshly for so long. He's been excluded, judged, slandered, and gossiped about. And here's a hurting man, a man who God made in his what? He made this man in his image, was hurting and broken. What did this man need from the religious leaders? Compassion. Right, what else? Acceptance, love, support. But the religious people, what did they see when they saw this man? You remember? An opportunity. Here's how. They think, okay, this guy's in the temple. This guy's here. When Jesus comes in here, he'll heal him. And that is one of our rules, apparently. Remember, you can't push the elevator button. Can't light the candle. Jesus will go, aha! Jesus, you're working on the Sabbath. That's not allowed. We'll trap him. Everybody will see it, and then we'll get him. We got him, right? They don't even know this guy with the withered hand's name, right? They just know this is their opportunity. They don't even mention it. It's kind of like this. You guys know what this is? Mousetrap, okay? Everybody's so sad. You care about him now, but then when he's crawling all over your counters and... So mousetrap, how it works. You set it up, you put this little crossbar on here, and you put something nice and tempting in the middle. I know, it's very sad. What happens? What happens with the mouse? Right? There's something tempting, a little bit of cheese, and when they touch the cheese, gets them. That's how it works, okay? Sorry for all of you mice lovers. This is what the religious leaders are doing with Jesus. See, what's interesting to me about this story is the religious leaders don't doubt even that Jesus can heal this man. Think about that. It's like the religious leaders have more faith than us even that Jesus can heal. They're like, oh man, there's no doubt if Jesus sees this hurting man, he's going to bring healing to this man's life. They're not doubting there. They instead put him in the center of what? Of the trap, right? They put him on the little bait right there. They're like, okay, if we put this man with the withered hand right here, he's the bait so that Jesus can get in our trap. If they're really following God, if they're the people that are supposed to be leading us to God, shouldn't they then, if they know that Jesus will heal him, why don't they take him to Jesus themselves? They don't even have to take him on the Sabbath. Why didn't they take him to Jesus on Friday morning, get him healed? Isn't that what these guys are supposed to be doing? Showing people God, guiding them towards God. They know Jesus can heal. Instead of caring for this man with the withered hand, they use him. They use him for their own means. See, they had on this face, the religious face, but underneath, there was something completely different going on. Their relationship with God was not everything that they wanted everyone to think it was. What did they care about? Opportunities, right? Yeah. They cared about control, power. Those were the things that mattered to them. They didn't care about this man. Here's what you need to know. You and I have this same battle within ourselves. Let me tell you, you're here on a Sunday. Maybe you've gotten out of your house. You decided God is valuable in your life. You came into this room even, right? That's a big deal, right? We open up God's words. You hear something from God's words. Everyone say God's words. God's words are powerful. They're speaking to you, and you don't like it. They say something that you don't like. So do you say, okay, Jesus, I don't like that, but you're God, and I'll follow you where you're leading me? Or do you say, okay, Jesus, I don't like that, so I'm going to skip over that? Or, I'll emphasize some other things. It's so important to be here on Sunday mornings, and thank God I'm here, right? That is what matters, right? Or it's more important than anything that I put some money in that little box. That's more important than what this verse is saying to me. That's what we do. And what happens when you choose to harden your heart like that? When you hear God's words and you harden your heart, you start looking for ways to control God. That's what happens. That's the outflow. You start looking for ways to minimize what God has said, to make it easier for you to put on the face. So you emphasize the things that are important to you or are easier for you. We'll put it that way. You would never say that, but you use religion rules as your own personal set of guidelines. You've chosen what is more important than others. That's what the Pharisees were doing here, the religious people, right? They're saying it's more important that you don't light the candle on the Sabbath than that we care for this man. They had chosen and set up these rules. And you and I aren't so different. Right? We prioritize certain things in our lives that are real easy and other things that are more difficult. Oh, I'll get to that someday. Okay, Jesus, I'll work on that someday. That's the choice you and I have. This is the first thing I want to show you that I see from this story about how God sees us. He said, you can follow Jesus or try to control him. Those are the options that when we encounter Jesus. I talked about this last week, how a real encounter with Jesus is what we need. We need a real encounter with Jesus. But here's the truth. You can have the real encounter with Jesus and then say no. Many of us can have a real encounter with Jesus, a life-changing encounter, and then say, no, I actually don't want to give you my life. Jesus actually tells us like 75% of people will make that choice. When he talks about the seeds and he's throwing the seeds on the ground, 75% of the seeds, they don't get fruitful, they don't grow. Many times that's the choice. We come face to face with this living God, and we're like, I can't deny you're real, right? I know you can heal people. That's what the religious leaders are saying. So instead, I need to set up rules to control you. I need to make it look like I got it all together. That's what I see here. The Pharisees, they came up with these rules. They're like, we do the same things, right? Read the Bible every day for a certain amount of time, or you're not a Christian. Attend every Sunday on a service, or you're not a Christian. Don't drink alcohol. If you do, you're not a Christian, right? We come up with these rules, and some of them are like extra. Actually, the Bible doesn't really, you may not know this, the Bible doesn't really say that, right? Jesus' first miracle was turn water into wine. I know it's a little controversial, but I'm just saying we've added some things. Now, is it healthy? Some of these things good? Of course. Is it good to come to church service? Of course. Maybe having a healthy relationship with alcohol and not over drinking, that's a good thing, right? Or maybe if you've struggled with that, don't drink at all. That's a good thing, right? I'm not saying that. I'm just saying there's things that we do which we create rules to maximize some things and minimize others. Some of those things are just like what these religious leaders are doing. Come up with these rules in order to somehow control other people or use them for our own means. Jesus came on the scene with all these religious people, and he started messing with all these things. That's what I love when I read these stories. I just see like Jesus, he just started messing with all of this stuff. He said, I care far more about people than your extra rules. I'm looking at your hearts. And Jesus is asking them, are you willing to follow me or your own rules? So the religious leaders, they decide to try to control him, right? They try to come up with these rules, try to control Jesus. Let's try to save me. Let's put God in our box. Let's make sure we get to say who's in and who's out. Let's set up this nice little mousetrap here for Jesus, okay? Put this little guy there, and we're going to set up the trap. It's going to be real nice, right? What does Jesus do? Wake up. Verse 3, Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, stand up in front of everyone. I'm sure all the Pharisees were like, oh, snap. Right? That's like you waking up in the morning and the mouse is like holding this up for you and looking at you, right? You're like, oh, man, I messed up, okay? I didn't know I had a genius mouse in here, okay? That's what's happening. I bet they were like, oh, no. Because they thought they were so smart. They had this opportunity, they had this trap, they had the little bait, and then Jesus is like, are you guys looking about this? This is what you got for me? Right? And then it says, verse 4, then Jesus asked them. Jesus knew what was going on. He knew the whole thing. But before even healing this man, he looked straight at all the religious leaders who had set up the trap. And Jesus gives them an opportunity. Everyone say, an opportunity. Right? Jesus' opportunities are different than the religious leaders. It's like that same thing. You're walking down the sidewalk with your cousin, and you see some money on the ground instead. You can either be like, oh, that's mine. Or you can say, hey, I think you dropped something here. Right? It's the same thing. Jesus' opportunities, though, bring blessing. The religious leaders were having this opportunity to get back. That's the difference. Jesus doesn't want you to fail. He wants to see you choose the right thing, to follow God's words, to see him as real in your life, to have the same face here as in your heart. That's what God wants for you. So he asked the religious leaders, which is lawful on the Sabbath? To do good or to do evil? To save life or to kill? You see what Jesus is doing? He's taking their mousetrap. He's holding it up, right? And he's saying, you've got all these rules. The Sabbath, it was actually given by me. That's what Jesus did, right? Jesus was there. He's like, I gave Sabbath for a blessing. Now here's the question for you. Is it for good or for evil? You're trying to use it as a trap. I believe there's something here that is a blessing. You're trying to use it to bring death, to keep this man oppressed. And I believe God wants to bring healing on the Sabbath. That's what he's asking, right? He takes their trap and he gets to the heart of it. They don't care. They just want an opportunity to trap Jesus. But Jesus, he wants an opportunity to get at their hearts. He's saying, what your face is showing is not matching what's in your hearts. Here's the thing. You can fool a lot of people with your face. But the one person who really matters, he sees you. He sees what's really going on. Remember the name of our series? Jesus sees you. You may wish you could keep it hidden. But remember what this series is called. It's seen, right? It's the God who has seen me. Here's the second thing. Jesus sees what's really going on in your heart. You got to know this. Because it's like so simple. We're like, oh yeah, God, of course Jesus knows that. But we live like it doesn't matter. We care so much more what everyone in this room thinks, or everyone at our job, or everyone in our family thinks, versus the one person who actually sees what's going on. God cares more about what is flowing from your heart than what you put on the actions. Many times we're doing the same things as these guys, setting up traps for people. Right? Many times we're the ones putting the little bait. Making sure you look good while everyone else looks a little lower. You're like talking to your friend, yeah, I was reading my Bible for 8 hours yesterday. Woo, I'm blessed, right? Or, man, God's been blessing my life. I got a husband, I got a house, I got a car. I think it's just because I'm so holy, you know? I don't know. Maybe you don't say those kind of things. But I was thinking, man, what about, maybe you're like, hey, you know you should really be in church. Maybe you say that to someone. Here's the thing. Maybe you mean it in love, and you've got the relationship to back it up, and you're really encouraging them, and your life has shown it. Or maybe you're using it as a way to judge them. You want that person to feel like they're a little bit lower than you. See that? We don't really know. I don't know what's in your heart. But remember, who's the one that can see? Jesus. Many times, it's more subtle. It's not as obvious as like, I'm more holy than you. We think we're so tricky. We put on this mask and we just like say the right Christian words or, put on the right little act when everyone's looking in the right places. But God knows what's really going on in your heart. The religious leaders, they set their mousetrap, so the outside, the people thought these religious leaders were holy. They're following all the laws they had set up. And so they see this man with a withered hand, But Jesus sees the man too. He doesn't see him as an opportunity. He cares about him. Jesus saw the whole trap, but he also saw the man. And I think this is a crazy thing. We can read this and be like, oh man, he cares about the man with the withered hand because he's about to heal him, right? But I think what we miss is he cares about the religious leaders too. He cares so much that they've missed what it means to follow God. And if you've grown up in the church, I think we have those same tendencies. The Jewish people were soaked in religion. Especially these people, the religious leaders. They had been groomed to be in that position. Many times it's easier to get saved by Jesus later in your life because then you see the difference, right? But growing up in a Christian home has blessings and curses. Sometimes it's easier to wear the mask, to put on the face. But here's the important thing. Jesus cares about those people too. He cares about them. He has hope that they will see. He's not trying to trap them. That's what the enemy does. The enemy tries to make us fall. Jesus is asking this question with hope, that they will respond and see how broken it is that they've set this whole thing up and used this man for their own means. He gives them the choice. What's lawful on the Sabbath? Do good or do evil? Save life or to kill? And what did they choose to do? They remained silent. We're the exact same. Jesus sees what's in the depths of our heart, and he gives us a choice. He gets to that heart, and then we have the choice to respond. He knows you can't hide it from him, but many times we're just like that. We're like, nope, not going there. I'm not dealing with that. Here's where it gets crazy. Verse 5. He looked around at them in anger. And look at the next. He was deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts. Does that sound like someone who cares? He cares about these people. I think on the outside you can read a story of something and be like, oh, those hypocrites, right? I mean, we have it happening today, right? You got this huge celebrity pastor, and they just fall into sin. We're like, what a hypocrite. Jesus sees that person that is so lost and so broken, and he cares about them too. He sees you this morning. Maybe you came in and you put on the mask. You've been wearing the mask for 15 years. Jesus sees your heart, and he loves you. He wants more for you. He's not judging you. He's saying, I have so much more for you. The same way the Pharisees were using all their rules to judge everyone else, we do the same thing with hypocrites. When someone gets caught, we're just like, oh, there it is. Not me, thank God, right? That's what we do. It's like, so glad they got caught. They're the fall guy. That way all the attention doesn't come on me. But Jesus sees the heart and he cares. It says he was deeply distressed. And he said to the man, stretch out your hand. And the man stretched it out and his hand was completely restored. Just like the story with Hagar, Jesus has the power to heal. That's not even a question. The religious leaders didn't even question it. But the question for these Pharisees, that's what's crazy. You see, they weren't going around saying, oh, Jesus can't heal. He's a liar. No, they even recognized he had power. What was the problem? They couldn't control him. He wasn't underneath their authority. Remember, they had set up rules to put God in a box, and then God shows up, and it's not following their rules, right? They couldn't control Jesus. He was someone they couldn't put a leash on. Jesus was claiming to be God, and he was messing with all the rules they'd set up to put themselves in power. And what did they do? Verse 6, then the Pharisees, that's the religious leaders, they went out and began to plot with the Herodians how they might kill Jesus. Remember Jesus' question? What is lawful to do on the Sabbath? To give life or to kill? What are the Pharisees doing on the Sabbath? They're like, okay, we're going to go plot how to kill this guy. Think about that. Think about the hearts. Right, they didn't want this man to get healed. but they're okay with going out and coming up with a murder plan. Here's the last thing I want you to see. There's no middle ground with Jesus. There's no middle ground with Jesus. I want to invite the worship team to come on up. When you encounter the real Jesus, he becomes the Lord of your life or your enemy. And I'm saying many of us can have the face and look like he's the Lord of our life when we're living like he's the enemy. Many times you think you can keep that face forever, or you just follow Jesus with only certain parts of your life. But Jesus doesn't allow that. By nature, it's just like this story. You can maybe have the face for years, but at some point Jesus is going to come and point at your heart and say, which one are you going to choose? Life or death? And these religious leaders are no exception. You can judge them pretty hard or notice that you and I have the same tendencies. I was looking at some of the teachings of Jesus this week. You can put up that next slide. Here's some of his teachings that Jesus gave. You cannot serve both God and money. How about when Jesus said, love and pray for your enemies? How many of you skip over that one? Or turn the other cheek when someone does something wrong to you. You bless them. You don't sue them or look for vengeance. What about when Jesus says, deny yourself, take up Christ-like suffering? That's what he's saying, take the cross. I must run from anything that is discomfort, uncomfortable. Or how about this one? This one's hard, Matthew 7. Following Jesus is more important than your family. That's what he says. You want to take a picture of this and look up the verses later? Feel free. You're like, I don't believe he said that. No, look it up, okay? How about this one? Hell is real and a lot of people are headed there. I know that's not kosher to talk about here, but Jesus talked about it. Or we cannot be accepted by both Jesus and the world. I mean, each of these could have a whole message. We could talk about them in depth and go in. But my whole point is we hear these things from Jesus and we're just like the religious leaders. We say, but Jesus, you didn't really mean it that way. I got these rules, these loopholes. I can make it so that I can get around these things. I can have the world and you. And which of these verses have you decided already? I've got my own way around this. That's not really what that means. Have you come up with your own way of putting Jesus in a box? That's my question. Because that's what I see these religious leaders doing. And I see Jesus wants so much more for them, and I know he wants so much more for you. Would you stand with me? You can get the lights, Maria. Here's the difference for me and you. Because of what Jesus did on that cross, we can invite his Spirit into our lives to allow us to change from the inside out. You can admit it and invite Jesus to change you. The Pharisees had the same opportunity, but we actually have even a further blessing where Jesus can come inside and change us from the inside out. He can work on your heart. He can help soften it. He's asking you, though, stop making me a game. That's what Jesus is asking. He's saying, make me real in your life. Know that I see you. So here's what I want to do as we close this time together. I just want to give us some space for you. Maybe in your seat, if you want to come up front, you can. Maybe if we have those mats, I don't know where those are. Travis, do you want to grab those? They're in the box back there.